everyone. Thank you for joining today's educational webinar with Cancer Support Community Los Angeles. I'm Abby Espinoza, the Program Coordinator at CSCLA. I'm honored to welcome you to this week's webinar titled Protein and Cancer Prevention. Before we begin, if this is your first time joining us, Cancer Support Community Los Angeles is a premier nonprofit organization providing vital social and emotional support to families facing cancer, including patients, caregivers, and their loved ones, all at no cost. Our programs include support groups, healthy lifestyle classes, social activities, and educational programs such as this one. If you would like to learn more about our services or watch past webinars, please visit our website at cancersupportla.org. Before I introduce today's speaker, please note that your video and microphone are automatically disabled for this webinar. You may, however, enter your questions into the Q&A feature found at the bottom of the Zoom window at any time. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. We may not be able to get to all of your questions today, but our presenters will share their contact information at the end of the webinar. Jessica Harrison is a registered dietitian nutritionist with the Create Cures Foundation. She received her master's degree in nutrition, healthspan, and longevity from the University of Southern California. Jessica is continuing her education through the Institute of Functional Medicine to deepen her understanding of how addressing the root cause of illness can therapeutically treat pathological disease states and promote optimal health. Katie Reines is a registered dietitian nutritionist with the Create Cures Foundation Clinic, and she obtained her Bachelor of Science degree in dietetics, nutrition, fitness, and health from Purdue University, and a Master of Science degree in human nutrition from Texas A&M University. She has experience working under the plant-based doctor, Dr. Lori Marbas, and Dr. Firm's Health Oasis in Boca Raton, Florida, and has her own private practice where she utilizes her experience with plant-based nutrition and disordered eating. Frida Hovik is a registered dietitian nutritionist with the Create Cures Foundation Clinic. She received her Bachelor of Science degree in nutritional science and her Master of Science degree in nutrition, healthspan, and longevity from the University of Southern California. She is currently pursuing a PhD in clinical nutrition. She is fascinated by applying nutrition research into practice to prevent and reduce symptoms associated with the chronic diseases. It gives me great pleasure to welcome today's speakers, Jessica Harrison, Katie Reines, and Frida Hovik.
Thank you. Here, let me go ahead and share my screen. Oh. All right.
Thank you so much, Abby, for introducing us, and thank you to the entire CSCLA community for inviting us to speak about protein and cancer. We're really excited to talk about this topic, as we know there's a lot of conversation around protein sources, protein timing. There's a lot of recommendations that are out there, so we are here to help to cut through the noise, share the evidence around our recommendations, which are based on the science and based on the research. As Abby mentioned, we are all dietitians who work for the Create Cures Foundation Clinic, which is a nonprofit organization that was started by Professor Walter Longo, who is one of the leading researchers on nutrition, longevity, and cancer in the entire world. And we work to implement his research, as well as the research done by his colleagues, directly into clinical practice, working one-on-one with patients and helping them to optimize their cancer treatment, as well as helping to prevent cancer reoccurrence or preventing cancer if they have any risks. We will be your hosts for this webinar this evening. Before we begin, I would love to know from all of you, what do you think is considered protein? You can locate the Q&A box at the bottom of the bar, and I would love to hear from all of you, just that we can gain an understanding of our audience's knowledge. And we will be offering different interactive questions throughout our webinar this evening, so definitely become acquainted with the Q&A box. And we will be offering a Q&A section for the last about 15 minutes of the webinar. Most foods have some protein. Yes, correct. Anything made out of amino acids, meat, eggs, nuts, not carbs, meat, soybeans, beans, nuts, meat, fish, plants. Yes. Okay. We have a smart crowd this evening. So just to give you a broad overview of what we will be talking about, we're going to be talking about what protein is, different protein sources, IGF-1, which is a really important biomarker related to protein intake that we monitor very closely, especially with our cancer patients. We'll be breaking down the protein in cancer research, as well as discussing at-risk populations. We'll be talking about a sustainable approach with protein intake, and then we'll be finishing with a quick quiz and addressing your questions in our Q&A section. So, as you might all be wondering, after that question that I just asked, what is protein? We see here in this picture, there's some fish, there's some beans, there's soybeans, there are peanuts. Well, all of these are actually protein. Protein is a really complex molecule, and it's made of the building blocks, which are called amino acids. There are 20 amino acids, 9 of which are essential, which we'll be talking about in a moment about what that means. And protein is absolutely critical for us to survive. We need it to grow, we need it to maintain our cell structure, we need it for enzyme production, hormone production, as well as to form antibodies and support and bolster our immune system. We also need it to maintain fluid and pH balance, which is super, super important, as well as using proteins to transport and store nutrients. So as you can see, we would all not be here if it weren't for protein. There are 2 different kinds of amino acids. So these building blocks that compose amino acids, we have essential and non-essential. Essential amino acids mean we need to eat them through our food. Our body cannot produce them on its own. Non-essential amino acids, the body can produce on its own. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, we are bombarded with messaging around protein from marketing, from publications, from the news, from influencers on social media. And to be completely honest, based on the research, this is really being blown out of proportion. Although protein is absolutely essential, as I just mentioned, and don't get me wrong, we need it in our diet, it's not the only macronutrient that matters. And really overdoing protein can actually be detrimental and really harmful, especially in the case of cancer, because as I just mentioned, protein stimulates growth, and we really need to be mindful about the amount of growth that's occurring in the body in the picture of cancer or with a history of cancer to make sure that we're not overstimulating growth and cell proliferation.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm going to dive deep into different protein sources. What's going to be the best when it comes to cancer prevention? All right, let's open up that Q&A feature. What's the difference between a quote unquote complete protein and a quote unquote incomplete protein? Does anybody have any ideas? And I would love, I don't think you can see the answers that people are saying in the Q&A box, so I'm just going to do my best to read them out loud. This complete, incomplete protein. Any guesses? I'm just going to keep it moving, but I would love to see and make sure you're all paying attention in the Q&A feature. Meat has complete. Okay, complete has all essential amino acids. Beautiful. So what is the difference here? High versus low biological value protein, or complete versus incomplete. Biological value. This means the bioavailability of the protein, or how readily it's absorbed. And it is kind of a myth that plant-based proteins are quote unquote incomplete, as they actually do. All whole plant foods do contain all essential amino acids. They just have different proportions that are going to be required to stimulate growth. All right. So a complete protein has the essential amino acids in proportions necessary for growth. This is from animal sources like meat, fish, eggs, dairy, considered complete because it matches the amino acid requirements for human repair and growth. And as you can see, this photo of eggs and bacon, very complete, quickly absorbed protein there, versus quote unquote incomplete proteins. These have insufficient amounts for growth stimulation. However, these essential amino acids are definitely there, all right? They may need to be varied throughout the day, throughout the week, having different protein sources to allow for sufficient amounts throughout an average of the day or the week, right? And this image, this is a chickpea omelet made with chickpea flour and veggies and avocado. So this has got a lot of fiber, a lot of phytochemicals or plant chemicals, a lot of antioxidants here, and it's going to act much differently on our bodies than a quickly absorbed, complete, high biologic value protein. Jessica mentioned this insulin-like growth factor. Dr. Longo has done a lot of research with this. This is directly correlated with cancer growth. It's very interesting being able to, can we possibly downregulate growth signaling pathways that may affect our capacity to prevent cancer? Let's see it in the chat box. Which do you think would help downregulate growth signaling pathways? A complete or quote unquote incomplete protein? Any guesses? Nice. Incomplete proteins. Exactly. We used to think that it was so necessary and important to have meat and eggs and milk, and make sure that at every meal, if you're going to be vegetarian, combine your rice and your beans in the same meal. That is not the case. Actually, research has shown that for longevity and for cancer prevention, we actually are definitely going to prefer these incomplete proteins. And why is that? Dr. Longo has done lots of research on this, from underneath a microscope to these big population studies, and how fascinating that there is a population in Ecuador where people have an insulin-like growth factor receptor deficiency. This growth factor receptor deficiency is known as Laron's syndrome, and it's absolutely fascinating seeing, okay, what are the people doing that live the healthiest the longest? These people are so protected against cancer and chronic diseases, as you'll see from this video. You might need to turn up your volume a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and press play.
On the cutting edge of science, we journeyed to Ecuador to meet and learn from a group of unique people, less than 4 feet tall. Scientists believe their DNA may hold huge secrets that could one day benefit all of us. Meet the big-hearted little people protected from cancer, heart disease, high blood pressure, and diabetes. High in the Andes Mountains, Quito, Ecuador is almost 10,000 feet above sea level. Looming large over the city, the giant Virgin of Quito statue. But the wonders of this place can come in small packages too. Meet the tiny Ecuadorians with a special gift, a rare condition that protects them from cancer, high blood pressure, and diabetes, maybe even Alzheimer's. Only one person with Laron syndrome has died from cancer.
Yes,
That's extraordinary.
it is. It is.
But there's a cruel trade-off. They can grow no taller than a small child because they have a unique form of dwarfism called Laron syndrome, a gene mutation that blocks them from absorbing growth hormone.
He's very, very short, 41.6 inches.
Like Yannick, who just turned 18, but is the size of a 5-year-old.
It's amazing. He's 18.
And 50-year-old Marcy, about the same height, but much heavier.
That's becoming worse. She has gained more weight. I always keep recommending her to do some things, but she never listens.
But she doesn't have diabetes.
She doesn't have diabetes. That's fascinating.
No diabetes, no high blood pressure.
100 to 60. Excellent blood pressure.
But he still worries that her weight might one day catch up with her. Does she take seriously your warning that she's pushing her luck? If you don't think there's a consequence, why bother, right?
Exactly.
Mercy and Yannick are two of only about 300 people with Laron syndrome in the entire world. 100 live in the villages of southern Ecuador. They're being studied by Dr. Jaime Guevara and Dr. Walter Longo, a leading researcher on aging at the University of Southern California. And Mercy's Kitchen, confirmation of just how fattening her diet is.
Plenty of rice, you will find plenty of carbohydrates.
But it doesn't seem to matter because so far, Mercy is just as healthy as someone going to the gym every day.
And so we see him define almost the type of diet that they have and say, it's okay, I can have a big plate of fries and there's nothing that this can do to me.
They constantly warn Mercy that being protected doesn't guarantee there will never be any consequences.
2 mice here.
But still, when Longo and his team gave lab rats Larones, the results in the smaller mouse who has the disorder were astonishing.
The mice live 50% longer and develop much less diseases. And this is remarkable and really the direction we want to go in. Can we extend the lifespan maybe a little bit, but decrease diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's?
He says it could one day mean a magic pill that wouldn't make us shorter, but would protect us from disease. How far away?
Maybe 20 years.
But it's still impressive. Also impressive how Dr. Guevara's work has brought his patients out of the shadows.
She didn't want anybody to see her. She was secluded at her home.
So has he changed your life?
Es que le he cambiado algo a usted.
You have given them something, a sense of community, a sense of importance.
I have made them aware of how beautiful they are because they are really spectacular in every sense.
Like Yannick, who is about to enter college on a full scholarship. He dedicates much of his spare time to helping the researchers better understand his disorder.
He's donating me his blood. He's just taking over like all types of exams, some of them painful.
He does it, he says, for his 5-year-old brother, Bruno, also diagnosed with the condition.
Bruno?
A gift that could someday help all of us, too.
So interesting. Thank you for watching that. So as you can see, based on population studies, it is important to have some growth factor, right? We want to be able to, as babies, grow to an extent that's regulated well and not grow a third arm or anything like that, and not grow too much, right? As grown adults, we don't want to have all of this growth factor in our bloodstream all the time, right? Too much of it.
On the cutting edge.
So generally, low biological or incomplete proteins are preferred for longevity and cancer prevention, as mentioned before. And as you saw in this video, mice and humans with insulin-like growth factor deficiencies, this showed major reductions in age-related diseases, including cancer. And in studies, it showed that average insulin-like growth factor concentrated in the blood, this was 13% lower in vegan women compared with meat eaters and even vegetarians. So just avoiding meat, it's not, if you're still including eggs and milk and cheese and yogurt, this could be affecting your insulin-like growth factor concentration in your blood. So vegan women tend to have lower growth factor. Also, intake of protein-rich and essential amino acids, as was discussed before, these essential amino acids in the higher amounts in these animal-based proteins, this is positively associated with more growth factor in our blood. Only plant proteins significantly lower circulating levels of total insulin-like growth factor, regardless of the same total protein intake, which is absolutely fascinating. And just a few more studies on this I want to mention. How are we supposed to gain muscle? How are we supposed to have any growth factor for our brain if we're not taking in any animal protein? Research shows that both animal protein and plant-based protein can increase our growth factor. However, in this study, this was about 14,000 people involved in this study, showed that the insulin-like growth factor binding protein also increases with plant-based protein, but this binding protein actually decreases with animal-based protein. So taking in plant proteins allows us to really regulate this growth factor to the point where it's optimized for us, which is so interesting. Also, this huge study, this was, I think it was over 700,000 participants in this study. An additional 3% of energy from plant-based proteins a day was associated with a 5% decreased risk of death from all causes. So death from all causes, that includes total cancer. That's really pointing to longevity and improving our health span. And lastly, recent studies support the association. So much research, this is a big meta-analysis here, going over cow's milk intake and risk of breast cancer. It makes sense that something that's designed to stimulate growth, something like milk with its casein, protein, whey protein, lactose, sugars, these are really designed to increase growth factor to help with a baby grow. Drinking this as grown adults, stimulating this growth as a grown adult, we really don't want to be doing that. Milk has been shown to increase this insulin-like growth factor, insulin and estrogen signaling, and interacting hormonal promoters of breast cancer, right? How does this work? I hope that this very detailed artistic image I created helps you to really clearly see when we take in an egg, because this protein is in a perfect package, it simulates to our liver, oh my gosh, look at all this perfectly quickly absorbed protein. Let's secrete growth factor, right? It doesn't have to really do anything. It's just already in this perfect package. Versus on the right here, this oatmeal with some berries in there, there's fiber, there's antioxidants, there's phytochemicals, and there's a lot of these beautiful essential amino acids. And our body is just gently, slowly assimilating these amino acids to create the protein necessary, right? This is the difference between complete protein and incomplete protein, and why the incomplete protein is actually more favorable to prevent spikes in growth factor and therefore spikes in cancer growth. Another beautiful demonstration here, like I said, this is important to have in balance. We want to be able to constantly, our bodies are, we have a new body every 7 years. It's really amazing how our skin cells are constantly being sloughed off and we're creating more all the time. And our bodies have this beautiful balance of creating new healthy cells and killing off dead and damaged old cells. This has to be perfectly imbalanced, right? However, if we're taking in too much animal protein, if we're maybe supplementing with too much amino acids, if we're really spiking this growth hormone and growth factor, this could tip the balance not in our favor, causing more cells to proliferate, causing growth of more new cells, and decreasing this apoptosis, means programmed cell death. So this programmed cell death goes down, and this is what is going to stimulate cancer growth. As you can see here, this is a little bit more detailed of an image, how the pituitary gland, it secretes this growth hormone, which tells our liver, hey, let's secrete some insulin-like growth factor. When our liver secretes growth factor, basically, this is going to be exacerbating cancer growth. And it's, you know, our cells don't just get bigger and bigger and bigger as we go from a baby to an adult. We get more new cells. So this is not just going to create a bigger tumor. This also really relates to metastasis, why we're going to see breast cancer metastasize to bone cancer, to liver cancer, or something like that. So if we really want to prevent metastasis, prevent cancer, it's going to be important that we're not overdoing it with protein intake and stimulating growth. Wait a second. We don't want to stop eating protein altogether. Like Jessica mentioned, how much protein is optimal? Highly recommend, couldn't recommend it more, a whole food plant-based emphasis. If we're under the age of 65, it's been shown to be helpful about 10 to 13% of our total calories from protein. If we're noticing that we're losing muscle mass or we're above the age of 65, about 15 to 20% of total calories coming from protein. Also, when it comes to animal protein, we actually do recommend just 4 ounces, which is about the size of a deck of cards, of low mercury wild caught fish 2 to 3 times a week. We like to use the acronym SMASH. So this includes sardines, mackerel, anchovies, salmon, and herring. This is essential for our essential fatty acids. And if you're not open to eating fish, there's also algae-derived omega supplements, and chia seeds, hemp seeds, walnuts, ground flax seeds also have these essential fatty acids. But if you are going to choose any animal protein, these fish at this amount is recommended. Also, if you're less than 65 years old, when it comes to cancer protein optimization, it does still depend. It must be individualized, how much muscle mass is already on your body, your activity level, the types of activity that you do, your current disease process. I don't know if you just had surgery and you're needing to recover, if you have severe burns on your body, sometimes we need more protein for sure. And your current growth factor level. If you're actually low, we're going to recommend some more protein. In general, this is the protein recommendation that we recommend for our cancer patients based on the research. 0.32 to 0.36 grams of protein per pound. And we can do this together if you'd like to whip out your phone, get your calculator out, and do your weight in pounds times 0.32. And we'll get this range here. Your weight times 0.36 equals about this range of grams of protein. That is going to be an estimate that it's going to be optimal for you per day. All right, that was a mouthful. I hope you're still with us. If you could please open your Q&A feature, tell me true or false. Plants do not have all 9 essential amino acids. True or false? Anyone know? Nice. False, false, they do. Exactly. Plants do have all 9 amino acids. Animals get their protein from plants. All right. Plants do have the essential amino acids. Let's get clearer on this. I created this chart to hopefully help you exhale and feel more at peace creating your perfectly balanced meals here. Looking at this, the animal products we think of as protein sources like an egg, chicken, beef, yogurt. One egg has way less protein than a cup of quinoa. Isn't that interesting? And even a cup of broccoli has almost as much protein as an egg. Vegetables, grains, beans, seeds, these are all fantastic sources of protein. And just looking at this, it's been really fun working with different patients and having them accidentally hit their protein needs just by eating more wholesome plant foods. They actually do add up as the day goes on. There's plenty of protein. Just 3 tablespoons of hemp seeds, you get about 10 grams of protein over here. And a half a cup of oatmeal has almost as much protein as an egg. So protein is really not a concern if you think about balancing meals. How do you balance meals with this? Yes, this image is so helpful. I love this plate image from Harvard. We can see that just a quarter of the plate is coming from healthy protein and 3/4 of the plate is coming from complex carbohydrates. And some people might be like, gasp, that's absurd. That's way too many carbs. Actually, no, we're talking about complex carbohydrates here. I invite you to watch our sugar and cancer webinar, which goes over this in more detail. But these complex carbohydrates, some berries, some veggies, some whole grains like quinoa, and then just a quarter of the plate being beans, peas, tempeh, tofu, that kind of thing. I recommend that my patients, when they're looking at their meal, when they sit down to eat, there's 5 food groups here, right? We've got our healthy fats, that's 1, vegetables, that's 2, fruits, that's 3, whole grains, that's 4, and protein, that's 5, these 5 food groups. I recommend making sure that your meals have at least or about 3 food groups so that your meals are balanced, so that you're able to get your nutritional needs met. And this is a great image to help with that. Some examples of this to really help drive this home. This one in the middle here, this tempeh with the rice and the broccoli, this is a great image to see, okay, we've got our protein, our whole grains, and our veggies, and even this chia pudding. Chia seeds are an incredible source of protein and healthy fat with some unsweetened granola and some berries, maybe using soy milk as another source of plant-based protein. If you haven't tried tofu scramble, I highly recommend it. There's whole grain bread as the grain and then some side salad. Looks delicious. So as you can see, it can actually be really fun and easy to get these different colors and antioxidants. And oh my gosh, chili with corn and beans and maybe a side of cornbread or sourdough, whole grain sourdough, something like that, can really help create a balanced meal and include protein and not feel like you need to overthink it. It can really just be this balanced plate. All right, true or false? High biological value complete proteins are preferred for longevity. Uh-oh. True or false? Anyone know? False. Beautiful. Exactly. We don't want too many complete proteins, okay? And I'm gonna hand it over to Frida to discuss a little bit more.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie and Jessica. So as we have learned, protein is definitely a fundamental macronutrient, and it's especially required for growth. So as we can see in this beautiful picture here, there are definitely particular stages of life that we may need a little bit extra protein during parts of our lives that we're growing. So for example, we know children, pregnant women, women who are breastfeeding, as well as older adults. And even within each of these populations, there are, of course, a lot of individual factors that play a role as well. The age, the weight of the person, what are the activity level, for pregnant women, what stage of the pregnancy, that could differ in terms of how much protein you should be consuming, as well as someone who is lactating. For older adults, we know that there are an increased protein requirement due to a more muscle breakdown as we're aging, and also an increased turnover of protein in our bodies. Athletes, that's also definitely another group of population that engage in very extreme physical activities, and there's more muscle breakdown and also an increased turnover of protein. And as we've learned, protein is essential to repair our muscles, growth, as well as recovery after we have exercised. So these are just different populations to highlight that this is why each individual have particular needs in terms of how much protein one should consume depending on these different factors. But overall, like, my main thing is like consistency. What are you doing a little bit of every day? It doesn't need to be hours in the gym or doing crazy things, but every little step every day, which is more realistic to incorporate into your life as well. That's really what matters in the long run. So a few advice: walk fast for an hour a day if you can, or even 30 minutes is great. Try to take the stairs instead of the escalators. And if you can and have energy for it, we recommend between 2.5 to 5 hours a week where you get up your heartbeat so you feel you're sweating a little bit. We also want to focus on resistance training to strengthen both our muscles and our bones in our body. We don't only want to do cardio, we want to focus on the muscles and the bones as well. So in regards to our protein recommendations, the majority of the protein that you consume in a day, it's best if you can consume that within 1 to 2 hours of post-exercise.
Beautiful. Yes. Thank you, Frida. So with everything that we've discussed when it comes to all these different populations, how much protein, here at the Create Cures Foundation, we monitor very closely not just weight, but also body composition. It's important that we're tracking muscle mass. If we're going to be decreasing our protein intake and maybe even doing some fasting in conjunction with treatment, we really don't want to lose muscle. Muscle is so important for blood sugar regulation, for bone health. So monitoring our body composition, that means our muscle mass and our fat mass, as well as our weight, is absolutely essential. We also monitor intake as far as, okay, how much protein are you eating? Are you eating too much? Are you eating too little? And we monitor the timing. Timing of eating actually matters a lot as well. Also, of course, blood markers, talking a lot about insulin-like growth factor. That is a blood marker that we can track. And things like average blood sugar can also have a lot to do with growth hormone stimulation and cancer growth. Furthering optimization, talking about a longevity diet approach, supplementation, possible supplements that might help, and different lifestyle factors. So when it comes to protein and longevity, I want to make it really clear that we do need adequate, optimal protein. As you can see on this graph here, this mortality risk on the y-axis versus the amount of growth factor levels in the blood, insulin-like growth factor. Too little growth factor increases risk of death, and too much growth factor increases risk of death. We want to have that sweet spot in the middle. Having too low or too high is not good for our longevity and for our overall, cancer prevention. So thinking about what else might stimulate growth factor, there's other growth promoters like overeating in general. If we're gaining weight, if we're gaining fat on our body, this is probably stimulating growth. Intake of refined carbohydrates and added sugars, so our sweetened Starbucks drinks, our sodas, things like that, baked goods, candies, this can definitely increase our growth factor release as well. High total protein intake and protein and amino acid supplements. So thinking about branched chain amino acid supplements, whey protein isolate supplements, these can definitely increase our growth factor. The longevity diet, I want to help you to bring this home as a lifestyle that's doable for you. And when it comes to the longevity diet, this is not just about a very specific amount of protein. We do also pay attention to the timing of eating. So we recommend our cancer patients to fast overnight for 14 hours. As I mentioned earlier, that essential balance between new cells growing and programmed cell death. That apoptosis, that programmed cell death, can happen overnight when we're asleep during this overnight fast. So I recommend finishing eating about 3 hours before going to bed so that you are fasting overnight, all right? Also, this longevity diet approach, it's a Mediterranean-style plant-centric diet, including plant-based proteins, plenty of vegetables, fruits, and phytonutrients in different colors, full of complex carbohydrates, as you remember from that image of the 3/4 of the plate being complex carbs from whole grains, fruits, and veggies. Also, we do recommend including 2 to 3 times a week, just 4 ounces of low mercury smash fish, those sardines, mackerel, anchovies, salmon, and herring, minimizing high protein foods, animal products, and added and processed sugars.
All right, so now when we have learned about different sources of protein, both animal protein and plant-based protein, our first quiz question is, which source of protein in general is associated with a longer lifespan? Is it eggs or peas? So let's see in the Q&A here. Peas, you see the emoji peas, yes, that is correct. Plant-based sources of protein, so peas is a great example. So our next question, does everyone benefit from lower protein, mostly incomplete protein sources? Yes. Yes. Well, there are some groups that may have higher requirements of protein, but you can still get it, yes, from incomplete protein sources. So that is correct. And then our final question is, what is one plant-based protein source you are going to incorporate after this webinar? So we want all of you to think of one plant-based protein that you can incorporate in your next meal. So some of the examples here I see are tofu, peas, quinoa, chia, lentils. Yes, wonderful. All great. Edamame, quinoa, walnuts. Yes, we definitely see there's a lot of different sources, plant-based sources you can get protein from. So as we mentioned in the beginning, Katie and Jessica and myself and a couple of other dietitians are a part of Create Cures Clinic, which is a nonprofit organization located in Santa Monica here in LA. And we also work remotely also. And we offer very personalized programs for cancer support as well as monitoring. We work very closely to each patient's treatment plan to make as individual plan as possible. It's very integrative and personalized plans that we develop. And then we collaborate between the dietitians, everyone in our team, and we also work with molecular biologists as well. And there's definitely opportunities to work very closely with Dr. Longor to have him a part of your case as well. So he's the cancer expert that we work very closely with. So feel free to check out our website or email them our email here on this slide. And then if you check out our YouTube channel, we do have a lot of other webinars, previously recorded webinars that you may find interesting. So please check it out and send us an email, please. And then we're gonna have a Q&A. So I'm gonna open up the Q&A box here again. So I see there's a lot of great questions there. So one is there a difference between milk consumption and other dairies such as yogurt and cheese? So it depends a little bit on what if we, for example, think about insulin like growth factor 1. I know there are actually a difference in terms of different animal products affecting IGF-1. So let's say yogurt, it has a lot of probiotic in it due to the fermentation. So research has actually indicated that it affects IGF-1 a little bit less than another type of dairy, but it may be individual factors as well. And then, yeah.
I also see so many great questions here. I see one, how do you balance growth, muscle building, which requires higher protein consumption versus limiting anabolism, meaning building up? Such a good question. And this is one that actually has been clinically researched. So there was a study that done with breast cancer patients who followed the fasting mimicking diet. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's a diet that's very low protein. Essentially, it tricks the body into thinking it's fasting while still consuming maximum amount of nutrients. And it's been shown to significantly decrease IGF-1 as well as help to support the efficacy of cancer treatment in a range of different ways. Of course, there's a major concern of people who are going through cancer treatment that they're going to lose muscle mass and that they're going to lose weight. What was so interesting was in this clinical trial with these breast cancer patients who were doing the fasting mimicking diet in combination with their chemo, as long as they did a 15-minute, very lightweight resistance exercise routine, they were able to not only maintain their muscle mass, but they actually grew their muscle mass. And so what this tells us is that what we're told from society, from the media, is that the body needs a lot more protein than we actually do to maintain our muscle mass as well as grow our muscle mass. I'm not saying that we need to do the fasting mimicking diet every day, all day of consuming really low levels of protein, but I think a lot of people would be surprised that you're able to maintain your muscle mass and grow your muscle mass even if you are very active. I can just speak for a few of my patients who are extremely active, competitive triathletes, marathon runners who have a history of cancer, and some who actively have cancer. And we keep them at a very moderate protein level, and they're able to maintain their muscle mass. They're still able to compete. It's just, it takes a little bit of conscious effort to be able to monitor their protein intake, but they're able to maintain their muscle mass, which is something that I think is really surprising.
Yes, thank you, Jessica. I think it's so brilliant, your answer. And I just want to add that most people go way overboard the recommendation for protein in general. And what we're recommending is actually in alignment really with adequate protein intake, optimal protein intake. Most people just blow that out of the water with how it's marketed so much. As Jessica mentioned, all of this marketing, protein in this, protein in that, you need more protein. Why is it marketed so much? I don't know, but yeah, Just throwing that out there. The SMASH stands for sardines, mackerel, anchovies, salmon, and herring. I got a quick question about that. I see a question, is it okay to have an 8-hour eating window? Now, this is quite individualized for some people. I do invite you to send us an email for those of you who have really detailed questions. As far as a 16-hour fast and an 8-hour eating window, research has actually shown that in order to have a lower stress response, like lower cortisol levels, we want to have healthy, balanced meals throughout the day and our nervous system, allow our body to have the signaling of, okay, I'm safe, I'm not starving, I can recover from my workouts. Our bodies need to have some nourishment, especially for women. For a long time, women were excluded from the research because of our hormonal shifts. And in general, women do have a lower threshold when it comes to stress. And it's going to be important for women to have breakfast for sure. Men might get away with more of a 16-hour fast and 8-hour eating window than women. But in general, it might lead to things like gallbladder issues, and it might not be sustainable, this 8-hour eating window. And we really want to emphasize eating more calories earlier in the day, eating a big breakfast, eating a somewhat smaller lunch, and eating a light dinner. This has been shown to help in people with PCOS, for example, different hormonal issues, and time-restricted eating when you compare earlier in the day versus later in the day, because melatonin signaling, when our melatonin goes up in the evening, melatonin goes up in response to darkness. This signals insulin to go down. Insulin is the hormone that regulates our blood sugar. And this insulin-like growth factor, right? These are very much related in how they work in our bodies. When melatonin goes up, insulin goes down, we really shouldn't be eating, right? We definitely shouldn't be eating when our melatonin is up, because our bodies are simply not going to be able to process that food very well. So if we are going to have an eating window, a lot of people, they'll skip breakfast. And I'm like, oh no, don't skip breakfast. Because in the morning is when our insulin is the most, we're able to produce and utilize our insulin the best is in the morning. So don't skip breakfast. Stop eating at least 3 hours before going to bed, and that 14-hour overnight fast is going to be optimal for long term.
Great. Yeah, a couple of things. So yes, the slides will be provided for all of you guys after the webinar. All right, so one great question. If you are significantly overweight, should you calculate your optimal protein using your ideal weight? We actually recommend to use your current weight, because we do take into consideration the current mass, like the current muscle mass and all the organs and the tissues that you have. So we will use the current weight even for an overweight person.
Had a question about pregnancy, and I just want to say pretty much everything discussed today is not applicable to pregnancy. Pregnancy is not a time to limit your protein whatsoever. Protein is super important. We want IGF-1 to be elevated during pregnancy. So absolutely not applicable to everything that we were talking about in terms of protein limitations today. Let's see, let me see if I can find another question quickly. Just a note on different populations of people. I see a question about how much protein for a 68-year-old. So individuals who are 65 or older do have a predisposition for sarcopenia, which is muscle mass loss. So we do recommend that those who are 65 or older do eat a bit more protein, even if you have cancer. There is another question about, I think I am losing the question, but I think there was a question about, is there a difference in protein requirements in someone preventing cancer and other diseases versus someone with cancer? So for individuals currently with cancer or with a history of cancer, we do recommend a lower protein intake versus those without chronic disease, just because research has shown that lower protein has been extraordinarily beneficial for those with a current and active chronic disease or history of active disease.
Love these questions. So here's a really important question. What if you are underweight? Need more muscle mass? Just like Jessica said about how what we're talking about is not related to pregnancy. What we're talking about when it comes to really keeping our growth factor low. If you're underweight, if you have barely any muscle mass on you, if you're frail, we're going to do whatever it takes to individualize your optimization here and make sure that you gain some muscle in a healthy way. All right. Yeah, if you're underweight, we do want to make sure that you become healthy there. And does that mean going crazy, eating all of the eggs and milk? No, it doesn't. There definitely are ways to gain weight, gain healthy muscle, gain optimal amount of muscle for your body, and keep this growth factor within that optimal range. Okay. And we really want to individualize that. So please send me a message if you're like, oh my gosh, what the heck? What do I do with this? There was also a quick question about tuna. Tuna is interesting because we don't know where it was sourced, and sometimes it can be quite high in mercury. I have worked with patients that have mercury poisoning. So sometimes people think that tuna and fish is a really healthy option, and then they end up eating a lot of it, like a lot of sushi, a lot of tuna, then come to me with a mercury intoxication situation. So I would just some caution there with having tuna super often. And it's also not as high in the DHA and EPA, these essential fats that are so important for anti-inflammatory and for our brain and heart health. The smash fish is going to be better than tuna.
All right, and then there's a question about hair loss, not eating enough protein, if that can contribute to hair loss. Well, we do need protein to keep our hair for sure, but I know the research shows that I think only around 1 to 2% of most Americans are deficient in protein. So it could definitely be other sources than protein for hair loss. B vitamin deficiency could be a cause. That's why we want to be very conscious about what types of plant-based sources of protein are we getting, so we get a variety of different ones to get enough of all the vitamins that we need as well, in addition to protein. And then is pea protein for smoothies okay? Yes, that's a great protein source for smoothies.
Which is a great segue into the next question that I want to address, which is, what do you suggest for someone who doesn't have an appetite in the morning? This is frequently the case for many of our patients, and it is important to have a tiny bit of protein in the morning because it will help to stabilize your blood sugar for the rest of the day. We do tend to be a little bit more insulin resistant in the morning with a surge of cortisol that helps us to be alert and be motivated for our day. So that cortisol is going to increase glucose levels typically for most people. And so we want to counter that with a little bit of protein to help to stabilize glucose. So for example, a smoothie might be a good idea. It's something really easy to digest. It doesn't have to be an enormous portion, or maybe like a small cup of oatmeal and you're adding ground flax seeds, chia seeds, maybe some blueberries. Maybe you're doing a small chickpea scramble like Katie shared, or like a chia seed pudding with some nut butter. And maybe some berries, something like that. It doesn't have to be really huge, but we do recommend always having breakfast, because also separate from all of the research that has been referenced this evening, there actually has been quite a bit of research done on breakfast skippers that has shown that breakfast skippers have an increased risk of all-cause mortality, likely related to cardiovascular disease. So that is definitely something we're always recommending, is making sure that you're having breakfast, that you're breaking your fast, you're not going way too long without eating overnight.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessica. There's so many questions and I want to answer all of them. I'm so sorry if we don't get to your question. Please do send us an email. Is IGF-1 associated with other things such as insulin resistance, or is the only known association with protein? Oh my gosh, yeah. Insulin-like growth factor can definitely increase. I mentioned in response to eating too much in general. When our body has all of these building blocks for growth, when we have too much energy in our body, that'll totally signal insulin-like growth factor, right? I have another question. It looks like somebody wants to see the sources of protein. So this slide will probably help a lot. I think a few of you are concerned, wait, how am I supposed to get in any protein from plants? So as you can see here, in a cup of cooked peas, there's 8 grams of protein, right? Peas, corn, kale, mushrooms, even oatmeal, brown rice. If you haven't tried seitan, tempeh, tofu, these are really fantastic sources. And I do recommend the concentrated sources of protein, like if you are going to have fish or tofu or seitan, having that after a workout, because we do want to have, as Frida mentioned, those 30 grams of protein post-workout. That's going to help with recovery and repair of our muscles, rather than that potential increase in growth factor signaling cancer growth. It's going to help with repair and building of muscles. It's not just about what we're eating, it also matters when we're eating, as Jessica so eloquently just mentioned.
Hi, thank you. Unfortunately, we have reached the end of our time together. I'd like to thank Jessica, Katie, and Frida for their time today and for sharing their expertise with us. I'd also like to thank you, our attendees, for your participation and thoughtful questions. If you'd like to learn more about Cancer Support Community Los Angeles services or watch past webinars, please visit our website at cancersupportla.org. And if you have any questions or would like a copy of the slides, please email us at info@cancersupportla.org. I hope you all have a great rest of your night and thank you for joining us.